Welcome, everyone. We're going to give it a few more minutes to let everyone that is still coming into the room to have a chance to do so. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for everyone for attending our NACDA webinar today. Super excited and honored to have this esteemed group with us. My name is David Chadwick, and I'm the founder and CEO of RealResponse, and I will be moderating today's panel on leveraging technology to manage risk in college athletics. Real quickly, in case you are unfamiliar with RealResponse, our mission is pretty simple, and it's probably the same as yours, which is to create the best possible experience for your student athletes. We've been doing that for over a decade now, and we have a variety of tools to help achieve those goals, whether it be student athlete surveys, two-way anonymous reporting for student athletes to share their needs and concerns, and then even documentation systems to help you all keep better notes around potential issues as they happen. But relevant to today's topic of managing risk in college athletics, we're really focused on helping our partners protect the health and safety of their student athletes as well as the integrity of their institution. So this is sure to be a very timely topic with a lot of great discussion and practical applications for you all to take back to your various campuses to be able to utilize moving forward. So without further ado, I'd like to give our panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves. And Jen Baker, I will let you go first.
The joys of having a last name that starts with B. Hi, everyone. My name is Jen Baker. I am at Johns Hopkins University, and I serve as the Associate Vice Provost for Student Affairs and Director of Athletics and Recreation.
Outstanding. Mike Mominey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mike Mominey, 30 years in higher education in athletics, last 24 years at Nova Southeastern University as a coach, Director of Athletics, and in my last role, I also served as the Associate VP for Advancement. Great to be here.
Thanks, Mike. And if at any point today our conversation stall out, Mike has promised to take the guitar off his wall and sing us a melody to keep it going. So,
oh, you can see that?
Stay tuned. Stay tuned.
I have some time.
There we go. Harry Stinson.
Yes, Harry Stinson III, Vice President of Institutional Advancement and Director of Athletics at Lincoln University, the nation's first HBCU to grant degrees. Pleasure to be here today.
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate you being here as well. All right, so let's start with the student athlete experience and specifically focusing at the D2 and D3 college campus level. Describe the D2 and D3 landscape for student athletes and what they are facing, both the positive and the concerning ones as well. Harry, I'd love to start with you.
I think right now, and I thank you for that question, I think right now our student athletes are facing a set of just confusion. You know, am I getting paid? Is that us? You know, is it, you know, do I get more eligibility now? It's so many different things that's coming out of the pipeline that they are confused and trying to figure out the heads and tails of. And us as administrators are scrambling to make sure we give them the right education, the right information, so that they can continue to thrive in their student athlete endeavors. So, you know, I think right now they're in a state of lots of confusion, trying to figure out the state of the industry, trying to figure out where they fit into this ecosystem of higher ed right now.
Harry, do you get any frustration from your student athletes with some of the answers that you give them, or is it more of just, to your point, the confusion and not being clear on what's going to happen next?
You know, they have so many sources of resource that you know, it's, you know, just dispelling the myths. You know, some are just trying to figure out, you know, are we getting paid? You know, those things just, you know, are inevitable as far as just trying to figure out their answers. So I wouldn't say it's a set of confusion. I think it's just more of just trying to get understanding and trying to figure out what's in it for me and what does this mean for me.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people in college athletics that are probably dealing with uncertainty now. So yeah, I can only imagine. Jen or Mike, anything you guys want to add to that?
I think one thing that we're seeing, and I don't know that it's on every campus, but I think we've seen it quite a bit. Hopkins has a lot of really robust grad programs, which means that we've been an attractive landing place for student athletes from other divisions or other schools who have wanted to use that last year of eligibility to pursue a graduate degree, which means that you could think that you're about to be a senior and be the starter on a team, and then all of a sudden there's a grad student who comes in. And so I think a lot of our teams have had to navigate how you assimilate transfer students in and what that looks like. And I realize on some campuses, transfers are very much the norm, but we were not one of those campuses until a few years ago. And I feel like every year there's always sort of that anxiety around who's my coach going to bring in? How is that going to impact the locker room? And what's that going to look like? So I think that's something that we've definitely seen.
Yeah, that's great insight. As a former basketball student athlete, pre-portal, I remember the days that the only time you had someone that knew that came to your team was usually a graduate. And obviously now it's changed a lot, but that's great insight. Mike.
I would say from a Division II perspective, I think there's stability, right? So I'll take there as a positive thing with being in Division II. I think there's a lot of good things that are going right and have gone right in Division II. I think there's a lot of opportunity for schools to start thinking about transitioning, whether it's from D3 to Division II, NAI to Division II, and you're starting to see that. Unfortunately, you're also seeing the backtrack. I think there was another one announced today at Division I going back to Division III up in St. Francis, if I read that this morning. But again, I think, like to Jen's point, Nova Southeastern, we were heavy grad school. We're not heavy transfer school, but the graduate schools and the graduate programs have certainly been advantageous, to say the least, for the situation that it is at hand. But I would just say keep the faith as Division II schools, because again, I think there's even though it's going to affect us, what's going on above us, I still think there's that maintenance and maintaining, I should say, of balance and the importance of academics and athletics. The student athlete is, I think it's still at center stage for Division II and Division III.
Yeah, there's so much good to the student athlete experience. Jen, let's go back to you. And Mike, I appreciate you bringing up the literally breaking news of St. Francis. So this conversation is definitely relevant to their decision to move back to Division III. Are the challenges faced by student athletes today similar across divisions? And then specifically to Hopkins' unique circumstances, how do you manage Division I and Division III all at once?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. For those who are not familiar, Hopkins is one of a handful of schools that is multi-divisional. So we have Division I men's and women's lacrosse, who are part of the Big Ten Conference, and the rest of our teams compete at the Division III level, some in a conference and some as independent. So we're really kind of all over the map. Let me start sort of broadly. I think the challenges look similar across all 24 of my teams on my campus. We're a very academically rigorous campus. So, the idea of balance is great. And everybody who chooses us, D1 or D3, chooses us because of the kind of education they're going to get and the kind of athletic experience they're going to get. And they want to lean into both of those things, which is a great concept. It becomes more challenging at certain points during a season or during an academic year. So I think and I don't think that's a unique challenge to Hopkins. I think there's plenty of athletes across the country who struggle. Yes, they want the balance, but they struggle to find it. And with that goes, hand in hand with a lot of challenges just around mental health in general. So I think, as all of you likely do on your campuses, I think we see a fair amount of student athletes who have anxiety and stress that at times can become quite difficult to manage in a healthy, constructive way. For us, one of the things, so I already sort of described one of the challenges on the D3 side, which I think is around sort of that, what does the transfer portal mean for us? For Hopkins, we don't typically see athletes who transfer out, but we do receive a lot of transfers. So for us, that's one piece of it. But when I look specifically at D1 and specifically at my lacrosse teams, so we are in the Big Ten Conference, which means we are automatically opted in to the House settlement. And on top of it, we're part of the Big Ten Conference, which keeps adding members or kept adding members. So for example, for women's lacrosse specifically, we now have member schools who are on the West Coast. So we are now going to the West Coast every single year, when that was not something that we were doing 2 years ago. With that, there's just a lot more missed class time. And I think that that is something that is definitely a challenge for them as the geographic footprint spreads. And I would say for a lot of D1 schools, it's looking that way as we continue to see more conference realignment. The other part is sort of what is that fallout of the, a post-house world, assuming that we get there. And one of them is roster limits and looking at, do I have a spot on this team? And or how does that factor in with who my coach might choose to bring in or any of that? And you've seen some schools who have chosen purposefully not to opt in this year because they want to let sort of their recruiting commitments play out first before they put themselves in a position where they have to restrict roster numbers. And you've seen some schools who have already cut kids for next year. And so the transfer portal is flooded. And my Division III coaches specifically are now furiously combing through that to see what that might mean for us or who we might be able to help out. But I've heard a lot of stories on that side of things about student athletes who've already had the tough conversation with coaches and understand that they don't have a spot on a team that they committed to originally moving forward. So I think those two things are big challenges for D1. And I have to imagine there's also the question, depending on what level you are at within D1 and what your sport is, who are my teammates going to be next year? How many of my teammates this year are going to leave and go somewhere else? And then, of course, how many new ones are going to come in? So I think all of that has to weigh on young people as they consider the next few years of their athletic experience.
That's great. Yeah, we hear a lot about the transfer portal, but you obviously have a unique lens of seeing it both on the D3 and the D1 side at one school. So that's interesting. Harry, anything you'd like to add to that? Not to put you on the spot, but obviously you have experience from multiple levels too.
No, I really don't have a lot to add to that. It's the same conversation all the way around. You're just trying to figure out how do you manage all of those new things that's coming towards you and trying to manage your coaches as well. So, looking at roster size and how that can affect your institution and your university, and how does that change your recruiting model? How do you do your evaluations? Having a conversation about, if you have a lot of transfers out and a lot of transfers in, do you really look at that coach in that same lens in this era of the transfer portal? So it's looking at things in a whole bunch of different levels and ways. And it's changing the way you lead a little bit, because you can't ask the same questions that you were asking 3 years ago because of the transfer portal, because of the influx of students being able to transfer, and how do you build your programs now with limited resources? So, it's a lot of conversations that you need to have.
Harry, that's a great point. I think years ago, when there was a ton of transfers out of a program, the immediate thought was a red flag. And now, as that's the norm, like that might not necessarily be an indicator of there being a culture problem or a bigger issue. So you have to rethink how you're evaluating your programs and really helping coach your coaches moving forward as well. Okay, so a popular question is, what exactly is keeping you up at night in this dynamic, ever-changing college sports landscape? And we're going to start with you, Mike Mominey, as the recently retired, refired, figuring out what's next. You may have less keeping you up at night than maybe you have in the past. So you can certainly speak to the previous years of being an AD, but would love to hear your thoughts on that question.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you would start with me on that one, right? So for the last 8 months, not a whole lot's kept me up at night, but in all seriousness, I've stayed in it, as a consultant, and of course, dedicated really my, 24 years and 1 day to Nova Southeastern, and was blessed to be there for such a long stint in 3 different positions, by which my family and, was able to have a great experience as well. But that being said, I still have a deep affinity to student athletes, to education, to intercollegiate athletics, hence trying to stay involved in doing things like this. Obviously, a deep affinity to NACDA as well. But as I try to narrow my list down to what does keep me up at night in this changing landscape, it's a couple things, right? What is truly the student athlete experience now? I mean, what does that look like? I mean, I got into the business to create a great student athlete experience at Nova Southeastern University, again, with the coaching hat on and AD hat, and even in the advancement world. So not that it hasn't evolved over time, but what does that experience look like? And I think for some of us sitting in the chair, especially some of us that have also coached, I mean, you really have to change your mindset on what that student athlete experience is. Then I go right to culture. I'm a huge culture guy for those of you that know me. And I think we all are that are in this business to some level. But, you know, I believe culture starts with people. And I think it starts with people that are in charge of recruiting the right student athletes to your university. And I get worried, to Harry and Jen's point earlier, in this ever changing who's going to be your teammate next year. What happens to our culture that we've worked so hard to establish on all of our campuses? And forget the number behind the D. It's so important that we don't lose sight of why we're doing this. We're educators at the end of the day. We're in higher education. I reminded our coaches and our student athletes that education comes first. But I worry, you know, what kept me up at night in that vein is that I think we've lost sight of that because of just so much change. And yes, I get that change, there could be some good and there could be some opportunity to come out of change. But the way the things that have collided right now and between NIL, between transfer portal, between even changes in Indianapolis with all the different, I mean, you guys track it just like I still track it, all the changes in leadership. I mean, that's a scary thought, because to me, that consistent change is hard to create sustainable success. Let me say that again. With all the change at the leadership, whether it's a coach, whether it's an AD, whether it's an associate AD, you know, that did happen in our business for a long time, but I get worried that that's going to affect the sustainability of success, the sustainability of building a championship culture as we go down the road here. So hopefully it'll slow down or even stop and things will settle down here sooner than later.
That's great. Jen, anything that keeps you up at night?
Plenty. I do, I echo Mike's sentiments. I do think there's a lot there. And it's very difficult to get any momentum when we're in a very reactive space right now, nationally. And that's really hard for any leader to be in, because I think all leaders on their best days would prefer to be proactive and strategic. And I think we're now just at a point where we just have to manage what's coming down the pike, as opposed to really getting out in front of a lot of stuff. It's just hard to do. For me personally, I worry quite a bit. So as I said, we're a multi-divisional. Not a lot of us. Certainly we were not at the forefront when the new Constitution was created. And now that we are in the landscape that we are in, I worry about the sustainability of being a multi-divisional institution when D1 and D3 are starting to look so very different. Not that there haven't always been measurable and distinguishable differences between them, but really the chasm is widening quite a bit. And then to that end, as I said, we are opted in, whether we want to be or not. And we are opted in, but we do not look like the other schools that are opting in. And we are not a revenue generating institution in any way, shape, or form. And so I am constantly worried about the financial sustainability of my overall enterprise. I think everybody is, broadly speaking. And then that's tied in with all the executive orders that have come out, because Hopkins takes quite a bit of federal dollars. And we've already lost quite a bit of that because we were so deeply tied to USAID, and because so many of the research endeavors that we have are tied to NIH funding. So I think, broadly speaking, my institution is needing to reevaluate things from a financial place, as I know many others are in talking to colleagues on other campuses. So overall financial sustainability for the long haul, definitely at the forefront of my mind, and keeps me awake. So I share that.
Makes sense. Harry, anything on your end you want to add?
I say everything that Jen and Michael have just said, but you know, that financial sustainability it just keeps me up at night. There's so many different things that happens that we're trying to figure out. How do you pivot? How do you pivot as an institution that is 70% dependent upon financial aid? How do you pivot if Title III or some of these other funding from the executive orders go away? How do you pivot with the changing landscape? There's more and more things that student athletes are looking at, that Division I student athletes are receiving as services, as benefits. And how do you keep up with the Joneses but still give those quality experiences for the student athlete? And so how do you manage that and still ensure that you're staying true to your whole mission as an institution, as an HBCU, as an institution that is in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, that's connected to Penn State, Temple, and Pitt. You know, we look vastly different from those institutions, but we're all tied because we're state affiliates and we receive an appropriation from the state. So we're not public, we're not private, we're state affiliated. So if that appropriation goes away, that's about 25% of our budget that changes. And how does that affect athletics as one of the key stakeholders for the institution that we draw in about 20% of the student body? But at the same time, we're still trying to manage, travel, expenses and everything going up. And so those things just keep me up at night because I'm always trying to figure out how do I give my coaches time. I can't always give them money or scholarships or things of that nature. My big key, and which is why RealResponse has been so important for us, is the fact that we're able to give time back to Coaches Day. And so, when you're able to do that, that also takes resources as well. So if the resources are going away or it's tougher for you to get, so does those things that takes that puts more pressure on everybody's day every day, because finances become that big key component for sustained success, and that definitely impacts student athlete experience, student athlete exposure, and student athlete welfare here at Lincoln, and I'm sure across the entire enterprise.
Jen, we got a question I want to pose to you through our chat, specifically focused on kind of these tiers within an athletic department. And I think tiers are not unique to the D2, D3 level. I mean, even at the Division I level where I played, you got the revenue producing sports and others. So tiers are natural in college athletics. But I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about the tiers that you see, any of the types of the inter-student response to that, maybe NIL discrepancies, et cetera. How do you manage those within an athletic department where there are inevitably some of those tiers that exist?
So I appreciate the question. I don't have tiers. So let me start by saying that, because I see the work and effort all of our athletes put in, and I think they all deserve time, attention, and support. And I don't know that that's a unique perspective by any means, but I get asked a lot, is it weird to have D1 and D3, and how do you manage that? And my response is NCAA rules will tell me what I can do specifically or can't do within those divisions. But other than that, I'm always trying to create the highest level Hopkins experience I can create. And for that, I don't want to be limited by what the NCAA defines as okay to do versus not okay to do. I am always challenging my staff to think out of the boxes. What does it mean to be a Hopkins student athlete? And to the greatest extent possible, I am really trying to create parity across all 24 of my teams. There are some inevitabilities. I have a building that is the Cordish Lacrosse Center. So the lacrosse student athletes have different locker rooms. They have different facilities. They're co-located, but they are separate buildings. So that's different. But everybody uses the same weight room. And the weight room that I made a significant investment in a handful of years ago, I think would rival one found on any campus anywhere in the country. Our D3 kids get access to that in the same way that our D1s do. Likewise with athletic training services, likewise with all of sort of what we would think about as traditional student athlete development or student athlete support type of things. So for a long time, I had a nutrition station that was within Division I, in the Division I space, but then D3 changed their rules. So now everybody gets it. So I'm really trying to do that and create the parity there. We have had some of our highest NIL deals, and we don't have a ton of them, but we do have some of them. Some of our highest NIL deals have actually been for Division III athletes who have gone out and branded themselves and earned those. Our Division I athletes still get more exposure. It is what it is, and I think that's a pain point, because I will hear from Division III student athletes that, why didn't the Baltimore Sun come and write an article on us? Why didn't the local media station come and cover our game? And those things are tough to navigate, but certainly our Division I lacrosse teams, especially in the city of Baltimore, have a very high profile. That's a double-edged sword, frankly, because when they don't perform well, that also gets covered very broadly. So in some ways, being a little more anonymous there can be an upside to that, but I certainly understand the the feeling like we want exactly what they have. I think within locker rooms, it's been very interesting to see, because again, I come back to the NIL space. We've been very successful sort of in matriculating transfers, so I'll say that. We've worked very hard to integrate them very thoughtfully, but we have had scenarios in one locker room in particular where there was a company who approached a couple athletes about doing an NIL deal with them, and the response was, we all get something or none of us wants it. And so I think they have opted to create that culture. That's not something I've imposed, but what I don't see, because there are other locker rooms where some kids have it and some kids don't, what I don't see is a jealousy or an envy. I think everybody is supportive of one another generally with that.
And I think what we're seeing in the NIL world too is there can be benefits to perhaps beyond the initial person that was the focus of the NIL deal, right? I think one example here in March Madness has been Amir Khan with McNeese State, the manager. He's not on the floor actually playing the games, but reaping the benefits of their success, and now had numerous NIL opportunities as well. So obviously in your world, one specific program doing well, a spotlight being on Hopkins could open the door for other NIL opportunities for your student athletes too. So I think kudos to you for having that uniform approach towards the student athlete experience across the board, despite the division they may be in. Okay, so let's now focus on the current landscape, technology, and its impact. We've talked a lot about challenges, so certainly you can reiterate anything you want to talk about on that specific question. But what are the biggest challenges, and maybe even focusing more, what are the risks athletic directors face in their jobs today? Mike Mominey, I'd love to start with you, and then we'll go to the group.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I think I'll say retention. We talked about student athlete retention, but I think retention of coaches and staff. I mean, said it earlier, more than ever in my memory of 25 plus years, there's just a lot of turnover. And I'm not talking about people bettering themselves. I think people getting out of the business. I'm an example of that for the time being, still doing a lot of consulting in the business. So it's given me a different perspective after the grind of 30 years being in it. Now these last 8 months, just having my hands in it, but taking a step back. But I think the risks so that's the people side. So I'm going to put it in two buckets. I'm going to call it human capital. And then I'm going to talk about, resources, operational capital. So the human capital, I just think I saw challenges coming, and I think they were already happening over the last couple of years of how to get young people into college athletics. Not as many people were wanting to get into the business to make the salaries that we were making, that we are paying. And I think it's also equally as hard to keep them. So I think retention of people was a real struggle. The other bucket, right? I mean, chasing the almighty dollar, right? For whatever reason, there's different. Harry, Jen, I all had different fundraising metrics to hit, fundraising goals, whether we worked with advancement, for advancement, in my case, the last couple of years, which was a big win for us at Nova Southeastern. But those bars just keep getting raised, right? So chasing the dollar, chasing the donor dollar, I think is a huge challenge. It's like it's never ending. I mean, you always feel like you're on a hamster wheel or drinking out of a fire hose, or you're spinning that plate like the guy in the circus. I mean, that's sort of the job of an athletic director, but like, when is it going to end? When is 2 million not going to be 3 million, going to be 5 million, just to keep things level from a resource standpoint? And again, you can use a million examples. It could be NIL money, which that's for another conversation, which I have a little bit of a problem with personally, to raise money for NIL. But aside of that, travel is getting more expensive, uniforms are getting more expensive, field maintenance, facilities, and you want to keep up with all those that are recruiting your best student athletes, because facilities are such an important part of that. So two different things, right? The challenges of keeping great people for a long period of time, trying to, attracting good people coming into the business, and of course, then chasing the dollars, especially from a fundraising perspective. So, and I know we're going to get into this next, as far as technology. How can we use technology to, as Harry said earlier, to help our people who can continue to get more and more, duties as assigned. I used to joke that I'm just going to take away job descriptions. HR and compensation didn't really take my sarcasm too well in the end there. But it's like, it should just be, associate athletic director, other duties assigned, because it's like, why do we even have job descriptions? And we're such all of us are in the business because, I mean, we're happy to do anything we can, but it sort of became a running joke because everybody is a fundraiser. Everybody has turned into a fundraiser, or, now we like to call it revenue generation. So you just got to keep chasing it in order to, again, keep up with the mission of your university, keep up with the student athlete experience. So those are a couple of things that I think are risks and challenges in the chair.
Harry, what are the biggest risks and challenges you see right now?
I think it's managing expectations, managing the unexpected, and then managing the emotions that are tied to both of those. I tell my staff all the time that you're either an expectation or a resource, and the only way for you to be successful is for your expectations to equal your resources. So E equals R. And from a standpoint of, there's so many expectations, especially for us, we've hired a number of Division I coaches, and that comes with a set of expectations when they come down to the Division II level. So us managing those expectations, aligning with those resources, and ever trying to find the resources to match up with the expectation to win and to succeed. And that changes from sport to sport. So, that's one of the challenges. And then, managing the unexpected. We are responsible as athletic directors for every decision that is made that we know about and the ones that we don't know about. And so just being able to manage those unexpected things, because those things come all the time, whether it's a parent, whether it's a issue with the institution, whether it is something that is just happening nationally and globally, with just trying to manage logistics or anything else. So from that standpoint, there's so many things that come our way that we are trying to manage. You have to be able to manage the unexpected. And then you're trying to manage emotions, because everybody wants to win, everybody wants to be successful, and you're never going to have enough money to make sure, or resources I should say, to be able to get everybody on the same page to be successful at a high level all the way across the board. And so with that being said, you always got to try to figure out ways to get folks to be on the same page, to be able to fight through adversities and manage their emotions that are tied to the decisions that they're making. So managing the unexpected, managing emotions, as well as managing the expectations that come along with being an athletic department.
Jen and William, same question. What are the biggest risks and challenges you see right now?
I can only kind of speak for myself, but I'll back up to when I was an aspiring AD. And even farther than that. So I started my career in the military, and one of the things that is like hammered into you from day one is that accountability rests with the leader. And so you can look at, there's very small units in the military all the way up to very large units. But I remember, being on an aircraft carrier, which when fully embarked has 6,000 people on it, and there's one captain of the ship. And if somebody at the very lowest level of that organization on the ship does something that causes a problem, the captain often is relieved of responsibilities because the captain is the ultimately responsible leader. And so kind of parlaying that into our industry, I remember asking sitting ADs or retired ADs, how do you know what's really happening in your organization, right? So how do you know what's happening in a locker room or what's being said between a coach and an athlete when you are, several steps removed from that level? Because that to me gives me anxiety. I don't know what I don't know. And that's that blind spot is a huge risk, I think, for any leader, but certainly in our industry, and in particular, in this age of social media, you don't know what's going to wind up on Twitter. I mean, there's plenty of examples in the last couple of days just through the basketball tournament of things that have been put out that shouldn't have been put out. You can look at the news headlines from this morning, and regardless of where you land politically, allegedly, there was a reporter that was brought into a very high-level conversation via a messaging app. And you never know when that's going to happen. So I think that's one of the biggest risks, I think, and I constantly feel, and It shapes the way I lead in my department because I'm always trying to keep a pulse on what's happening at the very lowest levels, because my responsibility is the health, safety, and well-being of our athletes first and foremost. And God forbid there was something happening that was compromising one of those things that I didn't know about. There's no perfect formula, but I'm going to try to hedge my bets and know as much as I can. The other risk, which is more of an existential one, but I think stagnation in general and stagnation of thinking. We're in an era where change is the norm. We don't know what college athletics is going to look like a year from now. We can make some educated guesses, but if we are in a situation where we're going to just continue plodding along, doing things like we always have, I think we are setting ourselves up for a potential fall, and we're not doing the best things we can be doing for our organizations. I think constantly thinking out of the box and thinking innovatively about how we do what we do and how we deliver on that student athlete experience in a safe and sustainable way is really important for leaders in our industry right now. Stagnation, I think, will result in demise if we're going to talk in grand things. But I think that is definitely a risk right now, to be stagnant.
So in light of that, all the risks that we've talked about, let's now focus on the title of today's webinar, which is technology. How have you incorporated technology into your athletics department? How does it help manage the business of college athletics, the scale, the reach, the compliance, and help navigate some of the risks that you guys previously discussed? Mike, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, David. I think, it's a must, right? And I think maybe some of us started with, website hosting, right? When everybody was going to the new websites, 10, 12 years ago. But to me, technology is the way of the world. I touched on it earlier, but it'll help people do their jobs better and more efficiently. So I think the investment into some technology, of course, you have to do your due diligence and you do your research, but there's so many great technology platforms in our business, and I will point towards, and I don't even like bringing it up. I'll just say the pandemic, where I think I'll point to that, maybe state that things have been really developed since then to really help a lot of us and to help our people to become more efficient. I mentioned that, everybody's doing everything now, right? I mean, coaches are doing way more than they ever had, whether it's fundraising, whether it's, travel looks a little different, whether it's, surveys, anonymous reports, to Jen's point, that's where real response comes in. You don't know what you don't know. And I was big on, we all know we can probably go to our trainers and probably get some information, our athletic trainers, our sports medicine people. There's a lot of info there, but you never want to put those people on the spot. But, how do we know we're creating? Mike, Jen, Harry, we all think we're creating this, this experience for the Sharks experience for them, but do we really know until we ask, right? The exit surveys, and some of this stuff, you're going to have to be forward thinking, and you're going to have to be, and you're going to have to be bold, maybe in some ways, right? Because as soon as you start doing these surveys, what do coaches think, right? Well, they're doing it because it's in a performance evaluation. Well, no, this is a transparent culture. We're trying to get some feedback, and it's how you implement it as the leader. So technology is a way, to Jen's point, to keep moving forward and to keep challenging your staff. And we're always looking at something, to better our athletic program, to plug into the different areas, fan experience, ticketing, compliance, real response for those exit surveys, for anonymous reporting. I mean, there's so many good ones out there. It's do yourself a favor and take a look at it. It's worth the investment, because it's not only investing in your student athlete experience, it's going to invest in your people, showing that you are forward thinking and you are being innovative. And I'm sure that all of our mission statements say innovative somewhere. So that was always my go-to when I was trying to rationalize something in the budget, right? You got to tie it back to that mission of being innovative, forward thinking, and you're trying to stay ahead of it instead of standing still and staying stagnant.
Jen, same question for you. How have you incorporated technology in the athletics department? And maybe even more specifically, how has it helped address or mitigate the pressures faced by the student athletes or your institution? And any examples you feel comfortable sharing around specific risk that has been reduced as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of schools, we've tried to automate as many things as we can, and we've tried to adopt as many technology platforms as our budget will allow us to do. I think, from a basic compliance standpoint, we use a platform that, documents all of our compliance processes so that we always have that documentation and that record. But I think two other areas, so I am going to talk about RealResponse, so I will address that in a second. But one of the big areas we've really tried to hone in on is integrating our, sports performance, what I would call sports performance. So we have all the people in the same room on the same platform talking about like the sports medicine side, the return to play side, and then the strength and conditioning side. Mental health and academic support layer into that as well. But it's really helped us. We've really tried to go to more of a data-driven model, specifically around return to play, so that like when we're talking about the health, safety, well-being of an athlete, we really have some good tools to make decisions around in terms of periodization of practice, when an athlete is ready to do what things, and we are optimizing their overall health and recovery that way, in a way that we all have access to, we're all on the same page with, and there's actual numbers behind those things. It's not a guessing game, or it's less of a guessing game. So I'll put that one aside. We do use RealResponse, but I use it in combination with some other things. And so on its face, and I'm going to assume that most of the audience is familiar with it, but we use it in two different ways. One, we do the end of season surveys, which I think are really important. And as I tell our athletes, I want to make your experience as good as possible, but I don't want to be selfish enough or self-centered enough to think that I know what that is. The only way I can know that is if you tell me. And when I give them the survey, like all of our sport administrators sit with the team and tell them the same thing. We read every single one of these. They are fully anonymous, so they can be as honest as they want to be. I can't trace them back to which athlete said what, but things have been illuminated in those surveys that absolutely needed action. And I was very grateful to hear about. The other part is we use the anonymous reporting tool. And for the most part, what I get through that is pretty benign, and I'm grateful for that. It's a lot of kind of facility discrepancies. But here's what that allows me to do. The minute I see it, I can act on it, which then starts to build that credibility with student athletes that if I put something in here, somebody's paying attention and somebody is going to, value what I have to say, and they're going to act on it. There have been other things shared in there which have not been as benign as facility discrepancies, specifically in and around mental health. And we've been able to respond really, really quickly. And that in combination, I meet with athletes regularly, largely team leaders in one capacity or another, but I'm always reminding them of RealResponse and always making sure that we are responding immediately to what comes through there, because I think that helps build that mutual trust. That when there is something really big going on that I don't know about, that there is going to be a confidence that A, I'm going to be listened to, and B, this is going to be acted upon. And we try to provide them a lot of transparency as well when we are addressing concerns that may come up there. So I think all of that goes to kind of keeping the student athlete at the center of what we do and making sure they understand that we want to hear from them. We invite that, and it's not just placating them in that way. So I would say those are two things that we definitely use it for. And I'm very grateful that the mental health things specifically have come through the platform, because we've been able to respond really, really quickly and get those things addressed. And we're like any other campus, there are lots of other ways for them to get mental health support. But if we're the way that they trust, then I'm glad they brought it to us. And I don't know what the alternative would have been, but I feel good about our ability to respond quickly.
Jen, I want to call out one comment you made just around addressing maybe the more benign things, because you use the word building trust, and that's so key, right? You build trust with the student athlete or whoever, and the likelihood that they're going to come forward in another world, if there is a more serious concerns, increases exponentially. And just staying on the topic of mitigating risk, right? I think it's so important, and you educate your student athletes so clearly on the how and why of RealResponse, right? This is a process for us to be able to collect student athlete feedback, and we've heard often that just having a way of collecting feedback and having it documented on people having a way to come forward is so key in mitigating risk. And one example, a partner told us that they were able to prevent a lawsuit, right? Because they were able to show we have a continuous way for our student athletes to come forward, number one, but number two, they're educated on it continually, whether it be our word of mouth or reminders that were sent out through the system. So obviously I'm biased towards RealResponse, but even if it's not our system, having some type of formal way that you are continually opening the door for feedback and issues to be brought forward is so important in today's world. So I appreciate you calling that out. Harry, anything else you'd add to that? The technology that you've seen beneficial and mitigating risk, and any specific examples you feel comfortable pointing to as well?
Yeah, most certainly. For us, building trust with student athletes, just like what Jen said, has been paramount for us. The fact that we are watching, listening, and we were able to add in other aspects and other groups on our campus that we can be a response to their thoughts and everything real quick. So we were able to add in our health sciences and health services to our RealResponse platform, so that if there was something that was affecting our students from a mental standpoint, mental health, their well-being, we were able to respond really, really quickly. And so those things have helped, and they've built trust, and we've been able to see what issues are going on with the team. I always joke, around here that there's always something that has to do with socks. And so that ends up being the storyline of, no matter what's going on, it always comes down to a team and an issue with socks. We would travel somewhere, and one of the teams, it became a whole blowout because the equipment manager forgot the socks. And that led to a conversation that was deeper about, just managing the logistics and travel. And so they use RealResponse to say, this is another example of X. And we were able to not only get that piece, but have a conversation and pull the whole team together, pull the coaches aside, and be able to address things really, really quickly. So, the joke around here is we don't want the socks to become an issue. And so, it's, being able to address things quickly, being able to address it with the right people, and put folks in contact with those resources so that they can eliminate those things really, really quickly. The other aspect of it is communication. Communication for us, technology has been a huge tool for us. We're going through a $35 million renovation that took offline one of our biggest facilities on campus. It has all of our locker rooms, our gym, our weight room, study hall. So we're all displaced all around campus. And so now it's a big key to understand where people are moving, when practices are changing, who's going off campus for this and that. So having technology has been able to keep us all on the same page. All of us are in the platform. I no longer have to wait on a coach to say, hey, we're going to have this person on campus. I need to get in contact with this student. I can go right into the app and contact the student. I can see their whole schedule. I can see where we can set up meetings. I can see when I need to address an issue with a team. I can go right into a team practice without disrupting the day of folks. So communication, as well as gaining trust, because we've been able to respond quickly to issues and concerns, has been the thing that has helped us most keenly, because of our relationship with our student athletes has continued to grow with that.
Yeah, we have conversations all the time, and I appreciate the socks illustration. Right, you address the socks, and that leads to the building trust for other issues too. But if the relationship's not there, it doesn't matter how good the technology is. There's not going to be a trust in bringing those types of concerns forward. So kudos to you all for putting a focus on that. We did get a question that I think is relevant to this topic too, around student athlete feedback, exit interviews, surveys. What are the best practices that you all have seen when administering these? How do you get buy-in from the student athletes? And even sometimes the differences between first-year users who are maybe a higher likelihood to participate versus ones that are on their way out. So Jen, I saw you come off mute. I'll let you start if you have an answer to that.
Yeah, I will tell you what has worked really well for us is having the sport administrator actually schedule a meeting with the team after the season and sit with the team while they fill it out. We have found that, like, if you just send the link out and say, fill this out, you're going to get a much lower response rate. And then it's typically from people who only want to tell you really good things or only want to tell you really bad things. But when we sit with the teams and we explain to them, here's what this is, here's how we use the information, let them know this is truly anonymous, because there was some distrust around that to begin with, right? And we do ask questions around coaches and other support staff. So we want to reiterate to them, we have no way of tracing who you are. But we will read all of the comments and we take them very seriously. And when I stand there and I say, especially like I oversee football, so football's got like 95 guys on the roster, I'm going to read every single 95 of these responses, and every single one of them matters to me. They sit there, and some of them will be done in 5 minutes. And some of them will be done in 25 minutes. And that for us has been really effective. It's just the sport administrator sitting with the team, explaining it to them. You make them bring their phones, they can take it right on their phones. But when you sit there with them, they do it, and they're a lot more thoughtful about it. That's what we found.
Yeah.
I would add to Jen, we did it similar with the sport administrators. What a great opportunity for a sport administrator to get more engaged with their team, to gain some trust. I think you also have to do it consistently. You can't do one and done. It just becomes part of your culture. Then the freshmen are going to feel more comfortable when they're sophomores, and sophomores are juniors. So if you're going to do it, do it. And then same thing, in person, with the sport administrator. Talk about it at any time I could to our SAC as an example. We talked to them at the beginning of the year, any opportunity, which is few and far between for me to say it to the entire student athlete body, our SAC. We really, I don't want to say leverage, because I don't mean that in a negative connotation. Just we used SAC to be our megaphone out to the rest of the student body. We certainly didn't have the numbers that Jen has, but 350, 360 in buildings. So that's a lot of kids to talk to. We already talked earlier about those. Instead of 80 graduating every year, you might be looking at 180 new student athletes to your program. So make it part of your culture, be consistent, and then respond.
Yeah.
Good, bad, or indifferent, respond and know that they're being heard.
One of the other things that I will add that just popped into my head is there are questions around their coaches and around, athletic trainers and strength and conditioning, anybody who touches their program. I always tell them, I do not ever show this to those people. What I do, and I'm very candid about it, as I said, I look for themes, and where there are themes that I can help them improve upon or I can reinforce with them, I will share themes, but they do not ever see these, because that was another area that they had a little bit of inherent mistrust to begin with, and they were cautious with, but now they trust that I'm not showing them to your coaches, but I am going to pull out the big ideas.
Mike, I want to elaborate on your comment quickly on respond. And I feel like I can do this because it is a risk management title for this webinar. Having done this for 10 years plus now, we've heard of many examples where folks do surveys, whether it's through RealResponse or other systems, right? Generic SurveyMonkey surveys, et cetera. And you just need to remind yourself continually that when you capture an electronic record of student athlete feedback, it is so important that you do respond to that. And we would advise doing that electronically as well. So having some type of record of, yes, this concern was brought forward by a student athlete in 2019, but here's exactly what we did to address that. We set up meetings, we did this with the coach, et cetera, because there have been examples now of litigation and opposing counsels doing subpoenas to be able to try to pull together the evidence and say, wait, you knew through your end of year survey in that year that there was a concern brought forward, and what did you do about it? In absence of the response piece and having those records, it can be really challenging to be against that. So Mike, I appreciate you calling that out. Harry, I saw you come off mute. Anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, for us, we were able to lead with our student athletes with SAC. SAC was able to lead the conversation with the entire student athlete body, and then it was backed up by the sport administrators and just overall my executive team about the importance of not only doing the surveys, but giving feedback about coaches. The coaches are able to utilize this for also discipline and letting, it lets me know that one, they're giving, if they're giving discipline, they're also having conversations with the student athletes, and to not just give the negative information, also give positive feedback through the platform as well. And then doing a lot of follow-up, whether it's in-person meetings or, like Jen said, having a sport administrator there to administer the surveys, and then following up about these are the things that we're working on. We come out with themes, and we try to figure out how are we going to address these themes for your team and then across the athletic department. So we've been able to catch a lot of different things, be able to see a lot of different things, but the key is, how do we communicate that and educate folks on our next steps, or how we evolve from the things that they're going through, and some things that we can do, and there's certain things that we can't, but just being positive enough to and providing feedback enough that we can provide that transparency. But that key component for us was our student athletes and SAT being the driving force around everybody's buy-in to be able to use the platforms and to communicate both positively and disciplinarian in those ways.
That's great. And not planned, we did have a question about how do you use SAC to communicate out to your student athletes. So certainly validation on that. We also hear a lot about Captain's Council, different lunches that you can pull together with that audience. So certainly lean on those student leaders to be able to do so. All right, so we're going to close out and we're going to blend our last questions for our panelists. What is it about the student athlete experience in the D2 and the D3 world that's so memorable and special? And then add to that, what's one piece of advice that you would give your peers as a way to end this webinar as well? So we'll start with you, Mike Mominey.
All right, yeah. Well, you wrapped it all into one there. So, I mean, keep the faith. I mean, it's still the greatest. It's still the greatest service position. I don't want to call it a job. It's just still the greatest thing you can do to positively impact 18 to 22-year-olds. I know I'm in transition here, but and keep, I would say also, don't lose sight of the student athlete experience. With all this change, it's easy to get caught up, but don't ever stay true to your core value of why you got in this business. And it's all about student athlete experience. And to me, that then leads into some of the greatest moments, memories. And again, taking a step back here for a few months, it's just what I quickly think of just those the joy of those student athletes and their greatest moments and the friendships that they built and again, the coaches' relationships they had and how much they're going to be able to talk about their experience at Nova Southeastern University, in our case, to their kids, their grandkids, and when they come back as alums, you could see that sense of pride. So that's my 2 cents on both those topics.
Yeah, Jen, same question.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's unique to D2 or D3, but I think what makes this experience special, regardless, is the relationships that they build, the education that they earn on campus, and what they learn about themselves, most importantly. So I often talk about athletics being a platform to develop leaders and it existing truly to help individuals discover the best of themselves and put them in an environment where they can push others to do the same. That is special. There's not a lot of experiences they can have in life that are going to provide that to them. And the advice I would have is that we just keep student athletes at the forefront of our conversation and our decision making. And I think when I look around broadly at some of the macro changes that are happening within the industry, it feels like part of it is because we shut them out of the conversation for a long time, and not with any ill intent, but we were focused in a different direction. But I think if we've learned nothing, we've learned that we really need to include them and they need a seat at the table. And some of the best lessons I've learned have been around how you involve student athletes in your decision making. And again, we talk about like, what is this experience we're providing? Well, I would love to hear from them what it is that they want before I assume what it should be. So keep student athletes at the forefront of what you're doing. And I think all good things can happen.
That's great. Harry Stinson, bring us up.
I echo that. I always say that athletics is a laboratory for the professional development of student athletes. And, if we keep those things in a co-curricular type of experience for the students, that they're going to grow, that they're going to learn about themselves, they're going to learn about how to be the best version of themselves. I think that is key. And if we keep those things at the forefront of every decision that we make, here we have a we mentality that everything that we do is about the student athlete welfare, student athlete experience, and student athlete exposure, WEE, and it's about we, and every decision that we make is about those 3 things, and they're a part of every decision. So if we keep those things at the forefront, if we keep those things in an experience where they are continuously learning how to grow and they know how to ask questions, and never to get upset with the question that they're asking, because at the end of the day, it leads to understanding and development. So, we want our student athletes to have a great experience, have great relationships, but at the end of the day, we want them to have an affinity for the institution to continue to grow and come back, and continue to make this thing be as successful as possible. So keep student athletes at the forefront of every decision.
Love it. I love it how our title was Managing Risk, and all of you talked about the focus on student athlete experience and investing in them. So at the end of the day, that's obviously such a core part of what we're talking about. So a virtual applause for our panelists, and appreciate you all joining and just sharing your incredible wisdom and insight that you've learned over your many years of experience. And hope that our audience was able to take home some of these practical applications to your various campuses to be able to use as well. There will be a pop-up for those that are interested in learning more about RealResponse, whether it be us just sending you material or getting some more information for exploratory purposes. You can select that, and we'll be able to follow up with you and send that. And regardless, appreciate the opportunity to have your attention today, and look forward to continuing conversations around this topic now and in the future. Thanks to our panelists again, and hope everyone has a great rest of their week.
Thank you, Dave.
Take care.